Red Level and Dell Technologies.
Helping smart businesses in Metro Detroit stay ahead of the competition with hybrid cloud solutions engineered to save time, lower risk, and support future growth.
Rethink Business, Rethink IT.
Ladies and gentlemen, this keynote address is sponsored by the Kresge Foundation. Please welcome the founder of Urban Planning for the American City, Toni Griffin.
Cool. Good morning. So now you get to walk and music is playing behind you. That's kind of cool. Hi. I'd first like to thank the Detroit Regional Chamber for inviting me back to Detroit this morning. It's been nearly 3 years to the day that I last gave public remarks in Detroit. And standing here this morning in front of a room full of doers, I feel a little bit intimidated and slightly nervous. So forgive me for using written remarks today, but I wanted to be precise in my thoughts and comments. I'd spent nearly 3 years and over 200,000 Delta miles commuting back and forth to Detroit weekly to immerse myself in this community to help create Detroit Future City. And I'm incredibly proud, actually, to be standing here today to be a part of your story and hopefully having contributed to that story and the works that you are doing and that you're going to hear about throughout the day. The Chamber asked me to come and start your morning by giving my reflections on what I have been seeing coming out of Detroit over the past 3 years since our work ended, and advice on how to continue your good works. Having been away from the city for 3 years, I feel very ill-equipped to do that. I feel like the advising that me and my team worked with you on 3 years ago is bearing fruit and offspring that, again, I'm incredibly proud to attach my name to in even a small way. Instead, what I'd like to do is speak about the lessons from that work that I've been trying to move out into the world, both the good and the not so good, in transforming other American cities. So I love this image, and I've been working in and out of Detroit since the mid-90s with the firm Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, working on the Renaissance Center, working on Henry Ford Hospital projects, and then recently as a planner. And I've seen many images of the Joe Louis sculpture, and I've walked past it, around it, through it, and under it. But as I was preparing my remarks for today, I came across this image, and I love it because it is positioning the fist, punching through the city, sort of making its way down Woodward Avenue, punching across the Detroit River, over Canada, and forging its way through the heartland of the nation. And I think it symbolizes what you've done together as a community. Detroit has punched through its most difficult urban challenges. It has punched out the naysayers who said you couldn't do it. And it is punching into a new decade of stabilization, improvement, and transformation. The fist has become a symbol of American resiliency. History often does not remember the plan or the planning process. 10 years from now, no one will attribute your good works to the start of 3 years of planning on the ground. People only remember the fruits of its labor, the development that they see coming out of the ground. However, there have been a few occasions where the value of the plan has been sustained, not just because of its beautiful renderings, although there is much to be said about the indelible impact that Daniel Burnham's Plan of Chicago drawings have left on the city's identity. The plan also sustains because of large-scale contribution it makes to its city identity and city life. And the planning and urban design lessons that, like the Burnham Plan, have been used to shape the urban form of other US cities. We also remember this plan in particular, led by its powerful and strength of leadership. Back in the beginning of the last century, this type of work was led by all male and all white brokers of the city. The Commercial Club of Chicago was a group of business leaders who hired Chief Planner Daniel Burnham to reposition Chicago from a trading post to a global city. But that plan, as beautiful as the renderings are, was about more than creating a city beautiful. The plan of Chicago was itself a framework that describes an urban approach to growth and expanding the city. A framework of infrastructure systems designed to improve the overall quality of life for its residents through improved transportation, boulevards, parks, sanitation, and waterways. So going back, when city leaders first approached me to join your revitalization efforts, the challenge was presented simply as a land use problem and a long-term land use problem. How to manage land and how to use land. The year was 2009, just a few months after the Great Recession. But despite the near-term pressure of an even service delivery, threats of a fiscal crisis, the recent history of civic distrust, Detroit's leaders decided that now was the time to make no small plans. When mayors of other major American cities, policymakers, and even a few presidential candidates all but advised Detroit to fold up and turn off its lights, it became clear to those of us who sat around the table to frame what Detroit Future City needed to be, that a bold vision at a bold scale, not unlike Burnham's plan of Chicago, would be required to prove the nation and the world wrong about the American city that once defined the American dream. As a city, you understood the scale of the challenge. You accepted that the status quo was no longer acceptable. You acknowledged that no one sector could do it alone and that you couldn't continue to work in silos. You accepted the realities, made tough choices, and sought new opportunities to be realized, even with a population that at the time was just over 700,000 people. And you believed that land, even though vacant, had long-term untapped value, that every neighborhood had a future, even if that future would not resemble the past. But unlike the great plan of Chicago, you also understood the imperative of a shared process, a shared vision, shared ownership of that vision, and the necessity for collective action. The path towards change in a city with social, political, and spatial contexts requires confronting fears and rebuilding your civic trust. An effective planning process requires building civic enthusiasm and uplifting effective community expertise as a legitimate component of the process and outcomes of change. An effective implementation agenda requires organizing all the sectors of Detroit's civic community to actively participate in this change. Now, to be clear, you really should understand that the way in which we created this framework, the way in which you came together to work collectively across sectors, across silos, across neighborhoods, is not typically how urban planning is done in such an inclusive and transparent way. Detroit Future City, its process and its outcomes have changed the game of urban planning, and others are looking to emulate you. So, just over 3 years since the completion and release of the Detroit Future City Framework Plan, a period in which included a declaration of and a resolution for municipal bankruptcy. From the outside looking in, Detroit is a city to watch, a city to model, a city on the rise once again with over $3 billion in investment and counting. And cities are taking note. So I'd like to highlight 5 ways others are learning from your example, how you're reviving the role of comprehensive planning, and why planning should still matter as you continue to do the good work of investment and implementation. The first lesson is how planning works as a convener. Shared leadership ownership is essential for effective and sustainable implementation. Others have tried to plan alone, and many cities have shelves of plans authored by a single source or a single sector. The city has a plan, the community has a plan, economic development has a plan, transportation has a plan. Their fault is not the lack of good ideas, but rather a lack of shared ownership and an integrated approach to addressing issues and opportunities. Now, you're gonna hear me talk about ownership a lot, both in process and outcomes. I feel this is an incredibly important attribute and value to the success, and I think why you've achieved your success and are achieving your success so rapidly post this work. Our planning work redefined the notion of community engagement, modeling instead a concept of civic engagement with broad and deep inclusion for sustainable implementation. Led by local and national experts, including the Detroit Collaborative Design Center and Michigan Community Resources, the civic engagement strategy recognized the need to build capacity within and across each sector for more effective decision-making, collaboration, and implementation. We learned from our missteps, recognizing that not all communities engage the same, learn the same, or share information the same. Therefore, we adopted multiple tactics for different audiences, and through that reached nearly a fifth of the city's overall population, building a new constituency for activism, planning, and development engagement in the future. I've since taken these lessons to Milwaukee, where last year civic leaders launched MKE United, an action plan for the greater downtown. Business leaders first approached me and wanted to create their own plan, unaware that the mayor and his planning department had created a vision for the downtown just 4 years earlier. We quickly brought the mayor and his team to the table, together with philanthropy and communities of color leadership, to create a cross-sectoral leadership table. We also quickly applied the multi-tactical engagement approaches of Detroit and began to create a new culture engagement of network building in a city where engagement was a transactional activity. Dan Patera and DCDC will be joining me in Milwaukee to help advise and coach local engagement team leaders in the future. The second lesson is about planning being proactive rather than reactive. Even through our framework planning, which was a citywide effort, our intention was to establish a menu of neighborhood types, quality of life aspirations, and strategies designed to empower communities to plan at the local level. Our goal was also to inspire a new culture of proactive planning in the city and guide planning policy and regulations to be more efficient and sustainable for development and capital investment aligned with city services. We had to spend a lot of time on the ground and dialogue about how our efforts were not trying to shrink the city to just 7 or 9 neighborhoods, as was once published in the Detroit Free Press, nor were we trying to cap the city's overall population growth. We truly believe that land had long-term value and that every neighborhood should and would have a new future. Building on the work long begun by the Community Development Advocates of Detroit, CDAD, we set about illustrating the possibilities for strengthening the traditional, strongest neighborhoods in the city, while also proposing new and innovative land use patterns for communities of lesser density. And to get this done, we knew that collaboration between community organizations and residents was only strengthened by a proactive city planning office. One of the most satisfying outcomes of this work is to see the reinvigoration of a professional planning department whose agenda goes beyond regulatory controls and land use management, but instead puts neighborhood planning and engagement at the corner and as a cornerstone of its work. And I'm even more delighted to have my friend and colleague Maurice Cox leading that effort, along with Arthur Jemison, Steve Lewis, Esther Yang, and Aaron Kelly, all of which I've collaborated with before, and I think you're in just amazing hands. These lessons I tried to take to the city of Memphis. Like Detroit, my work in Memphis began with a hard reality check around existing conditions and opportunities, engaging civic leaders in dialogues through tough choices and tough decisions. Here, leaders grappled with the scope and the scale of the planning effort, as well as who would lead it. In this case, however, ultimately the city decided to do the planning work on its own. But they did look around the country, see the planning work that was coming out of Detroit and other parts of the country, and decided to reorganize and reshape their function of planning, which currently had been only a city-county function. I believe that the work that you're doing here in Detroit and modeling a more proactive planning office has shaped the way that they've made additional investments in staffing and resources for the city to take on its own citywide planning effort, which began last year in 2016. And this work has already begun to attract external capital, another lesson learned from the Detroit Future City work, including the Kresge Foundation, who through their American Cities practice is exporting critical lessons from Detroit Future City. But our third lesson is about planning realized. And a professor of mine once told me that, Toni, planning is human, but to implement, divine. It's about getting action done on the ground. Detroit Future City as a framework makes recommendations to stabilize, sustain, improve, and transform. And these last 3 years have seen great push and efforts to improving the quality of life of residents, like through city systems, infrastructure, and city services. The Detroit Future City Implementation Office continues to play an active role in stewardship and technical assistance, including piloting implementation tactics for transforming vacant land into productive land. 2 of the 7 major employment centers in the city are seeing accelerated growth and development. Much of the thinking and organization of this happening long before DFC. And innovative investment programs have been launched to support one of our most critical economic growth clusters, entrepreneurship, with an emphasis on investing local and growing equity among businesses of color. Here I'd like to highlight work that I imported to Detroit from my previous work in Washington, D.C., which emphasized the role of planning as an agent for implementation. In just 6 years' time under the leadership of Mayor Tony Williams, we created an inclusive planning process and planning products for every neighborhood in the city, including a citywide comprehensive plan and a plan for the 11-mile stretch of the Anacostia River. In just 10 years, these plans have been realized, developed, or are either underway, creating new affordable and market rate housing, using public land to create new open space and open space networks, and creating a new vibrant 24/7 downtown with housing and retail. But in our fourth lesson, I like to highlight intention. Planning without intention might create unintended consequences. As I reflect on my work in Washington, D.C., and the demographics both before and after our planning work, I've been asking myself some pretty critical questions. Did we adequately put equity and inclusion at the center of our work as we look at the shifts in racial, population, and income over the last 30 to 40 years? Did we do enough to ensure a diversity of incomes, jobs, and wealth for existing residents as well as new talent? My cautionary tale for you in Detroit is how the issues of race, inclusion, diversity, ownership, access, and equity drive and stay central to the doing and implementation you currently have underway. Will those 163,000 people who lent their voice to the creation of Detroit Future City see the benefits of its implementation? As a practitioner and an academic, I get to reflect upon my work and practice and examine its implications as well as model new theories of change. Coming out of Detroit Future City, coupled with my work in Newark, in DC, and in Harlem, I've been developing a body of research that investigates how design and planning can more deeply and be more sustainable in its impact on urban justice, equity, and inclusion in cities. I now lead the Just City Lab at Harvard's Graduate School of Design, and our work can be found on this website, designforthejustcity.org. To date, we've produced 2 publications, one defining the Just City through a series of global essays, and one examining how to measure the presence of justice and injustice in cities. The work is premised on giving the community the voice and the opportunity to define its own values for the Just City. We've created a framework of over 50 values around the themes of fairness, aspiration, acceptance, democracy, power, engagement, identity, resiliency, rights, welfare, mobility, and choice. In our work on public life and urban justice, we partnered with Gell Studios of Copenhagen to examine how urban justice works in public space, asking questions like, are public spaces facilitating greater transit as well as social connectivity? We even created a distinct set of evaluation metrics and collected data for over 7 plazas in New York City to determine if values like equity, connectivity, choice, participation, and beauty were present. The findings will inform how we redesign, reprogram, and operate public spaces differently to create greater urban justice. And I would advise, and one of the things that we didn't do in Detroit Future City is create those metrics by which we can look back and evaluate if the goals we set forward we're achieving in this way. And I would encourage you, as you continue to implement, to think about doing that. I'm now attempting to integrate the Just City framework into our work in Milwaukee. Despite a number of current trends that suggest that the downtown is on the rise, other demographics and the sentiments of community members remind us that deeply systemic issues of race, class, and exclusion impede true economic growth and empowerment for residents and businesses. The early goals, objectives, and transformative directions of our work aim to craft specific and precise language around these issues, removing coded language and confronting these difficult and deeply intertwined issues head-on. But let me end on a high note and leave the last lesson to be about planning as innovation. The world now sees Detroit as a planning and design pioneer. Back in 2013, shortly after the release of Detroit Future City, I launched a design conference here to highlight and share the innovative practices of planning and design that we modeled through Detroit Future City. We launched the website Legacy City Design in 2014, which showcases the innovative work we did here, as well as the innovative work that designers, planners, and practitioners are modeling on the ground in other industrial and post-industrial cities. Design process innovation can be seen through the creative small business investment programs that you're creating here. TED Talks have done much to help aid in the global exposure of Detroit, with audiences over 1 million views and providing you a unique platform to create and disseminate your own narratives about the city. UNESCO has named Detroit its first city of design. And in 2016, new fantastical visions of Detroit were brought to a global audience at the American Pavilion of the Venice Biennale. And now these design visions and the implementation that you are modeling are becoming a reality, capturing new spaces that were once vacant and reclaiming old spaces to be a part of the city fabric. So I actually don't think it's a stretch to compare ourselves and our planning work to the likes of Daniel Burnham and the Plan of Chicago. For Detroit need not make small plans. They have no magic to stir men's or women's blood. Make big plans, aim high in hope and in work. Thank you and enjoy your day.